About an hour and a half. Take your time. Bueno, bienvenidos a todos. Les quiero presentar al rabino y profesor Richard Hidary. Bueno, él ahorita enseña, es un profesor en Yeshiva University. Principalmente enseña diferentes cursos de Tanaj, de la historia del segundo Betamigdash, de los rollos del Mar Muerto. También su investigación está muy enfocada en la comparación entre las diferencias del Talmud Babli y el Talmud Yerushalmi. Eh, es una persona muy preparada y también estudió leyes en la Universidad de Cardoso y tiene varios libros. Uno de ellos se llama Dispute for the Sake of Heaven y también tiene varios artículos. Eh, bueno, bienvenidos a todos. Espero que disfruten de la clase y les pido a todos si pueden prender su cámara para tener una clase más amena. Y so welcome. We're so happy to have you here with us, and thank you for giving us part of your time and to share your ideas with us.
Muchas gracias. Mi mamá está de Colombia, entonces yo sé un poquito español.
Okay.
Pero yo hablar en inglés. Thank you so much for having me, and I'm excited to meet your group and learn together about Rambam, and especially his letter on astrology, which is one of my favorite writings of HaRambam. So if I may, I'm going to share my screen so that we can look at it together. We can look at the sources together. Okay. And first, just a short introduction to HaRambam. I'm sure everybody's familiar, but some of the dates here will become important so we understand the context in which this letter was written. Rambam himself was born in 1138 in Spain, in Cordoba. And when he was born, this was a golden age, a Jewish golden age of Spain, where Jews and Muslims and Christians got along well and studied, were in a philosophical mode together and learning from each other how to combine religion and philosophy. Rambam grew and just really appreciated that world. But when he was just not even 20 years old, everything changed in Spain with the Almohads. This was a fanatic Muslim tribe from Morocco that came in, and they were not as tolerant as Muslims that controlled southern Spain before. And they did not allow Christians and Jews to remain there unless they agreed to convert to Islam. So Rambam's family moved south, moved to Morocco. And what's interesting is that the Jews at this point in southern Spain really had two choices. They could go south, as Rambam did, or they could go north to southern France, which was under Christian rule. And then that way they could get away from the Almohad invasion. And that would make sense. And many, many Jews did go there. And so in southern France, in Provence, the letter that we're going to read is actually written to the Jewish community in Provence. So that's why this is important. So many people with that philosophical Jewish background moved to southern France. Rambam's father, however, and his family, interestingly, decided not to do that, but to go to Morocco, which is where the Almohads were actually from. And probably during that time, that was quite a dangerous place to be. They probably had to be in hiding in terms of their Judaism until they were able to leave. Rambam goes to Israel for 5 or 6 months to see perhaps he can live in the Holy Land. Turns out to be impossible. There's hardly a community. There's a lot of poverty. Rambam would not be able to flourish and accomplish everything that he did in Israel. And so finally, they moved to Cairo, and that's where he remains the rest of his life, where he writes his, he already completed his first major work, commentary on the Mishnah, and that's where he writes his Mishneh Torah and the Guide of the Perplexed. And these works are spread throughout the world, Jewish communities from east to west. And already in Rambam's lifetime, he is recognized as an authority. He revolutionizes halacha. His Mishneh Torah becomes the basis of halacha ever after. And his Guide of the Perplexed is of Jewish philosophy. Every work of Jewish philosophy after that is deeply embedded, deeply influenced by the Guide of the Perplexed. And finally, Rambam dies in the year 1204, at just 66 years old. So a relatively short life, especially by modern standards, and yet Rambam was able to accomplish so much. We know more about Rambam than most people, thanks to the Cairo Geniza. Geniza, really a place where people threw out Shemot for over 1,000 years from the time this synagogue was built, the Ben Ezra synagogue in Cairo. I was lucky enough to go to that synagogue some years ago. And the discovery of that Geniza, which usually when someone dies, the shamash, as we do today, will bury the shemot, but there they kept it in the closet in the back for 1,000 years. And among the things that were found were Rambam's own writing, in fact, his own handwriting. And so here is a letter that Rambam is requesting for people, a community, to raise money for a poor person to pay his poll tax. And here's his own signature: Moshe B'Rabbi Maimon Zatzal, right? Moses, the son of Maimon, and Zatzal for his father who had passed away. He signs it. So it's just quite amazing that Rambam wrote a letter to someone, and then the recipient probably kept it for a while and then says, okay, I don't need this anymore, and threw it into the Geniza. But that's very lucky for us, because that way we still have it. Other things that were found in the Cairo Geniza is just this little piece of paper here that talks about someone who came to visit the Rambam on a mission. He had to deliver a message to the Rambam, and rather than just take the message and that's it, Rambam invites him in and he has him sit down and they chat, and they brought a butler brought out lemon cakes. So now we get to see Rambam's favorite dessert was lemon cakes. So that's why I love to see that, and you really get to know Rambam and his personality. So that's what I love about the letters. From Rambam's major works, of course, we're indebted to them for all of our halacha and all of our philosophy. But those major works are very structured, very official, very formal. But Rambam, in his letters, personal letters like this one, or communal letters like the one we're about to read, that's where we really get to see a lot more of Rambam's personality. So with that introduction, let's look at the letter that we're going to read tonight. This is a letter to the Jews of Marseille in southern France. So a lot of them were probably from families that were once in Spain. So Rambam feels a close connection to them and certainly cares a lot about them. He wrote this letter in the year 1194, towards the end of his life. He had already written his major works, and so this is a situation that came up. And the people asked him about it. The questioner, we don't have the question part of it, but we can tell what the question was, had to do with people coming and claiming to be Mashiach. And this would happen every so often in different lands. In Yemen, this happened quite often, something about like every 50 years. Someone in Yemen came and said, I'm Mashiach. And Rambam has a whole separate letter to the Jews of Yemen to help them distinguish between what is a true Mashiach and what is a false Mashiach. And a false messiahs could be very dangerous, because they bring up people's hopes, but then when redemption doesn't come, then they fall into deep depression. Rambam, in the letter to Yemen, talks about one story, one case where someone said, listen, everyone, Mashiach is going to come soon on Pesach, and therefore everybody, you should all sell your land and sell your businesses and everything, right? It doesn't matter what price you get, because we're leaving, we're going to Israel. And furthermore, this false Mashiach said, everyone should take loans, no matter what, because we're going to leave and then you won't have to repay the loans. And so many people who were followers of this false Messiah did just that. And then Pesach came and went, and the redemption never actually came. And now they were stuck with these huge loans, and they sold all their businesses, and it was just devastating to the community. So Rambam understood the danger of false messiahs. And so this letter also is meant to counter. Now, what led people to believe in a false messiah? Well, a lot of it has to do with astrology. Astrology was very popular then. It was kind of like the science of the time. People would look up at the stars and look at the constellations and their zodiac and try to figure out and calculate what was going to the future, what would happen, personal things like, am I going to be good or bad? And communal things like, when will Mashiach come? And Rambam, as we're going to see, thinks that astrology is false. And not only is it false, it's also idolatrous and also very dangerous. And so this letter is all about that. But as we'll see in the letter, Rambam talks about other matters and other topics that are all related. And he gives us really fundamental guidance that I think is still very applicable today. So let's start off the beginning of the letter. Several intimate, wise friends of mine in Marseille, well-versed in Jewish law and legal matters, put to me several pertinent questions. May the Almighty protect them, increase their wisdom, magnify and glorify their erudition, and so on, and the prayers for them. So this is a usual flowery language that you'd put in the beginning of a letter. So I hope that this will clear everything up and you'll have safety. Okay, so now to your question. Although it has many ramifications and subdivisions, may be reduced to one basic issue, namely the problem of the astrologers, the stargazers. Apparently, my work, Mishneh Torah, on the laws of the Torah has not reached you yet. Otherwise, you would have known my opinion on the questions you posed, as I've exposed them in the chapter on idolatry and pagan statutes. I am certain, however, that my work will reach you before this reply, as it has spread already to the island of Sicily, as well as to the east, west, and Yemen. Nevertheless, I wish to respond to you directly and elucidate the issue that you raised. Okay, one thing you have to know, the Rambam could be sarcastic sometimes, even a lot, in his letters, and I think this line is meant to be a bit of a jab against them, right? My work, Mishneh Torah, I already wrote what I think about astrology in my code of Jewish law, which is already quite famous. It's reached all the way the east and the west and the south, but I guess you haven't. I guess it hasn't gotten to you. Now, the likelihood is that it did get to southern France. I mean, we have other letters from that area about Mishneh Torah, and so it seems evident that the Mishneh Torah did get there and they did read it, but they didn't look into that section of Mishneh Torah carefully enough, or maybe Rambam wasn't explicit enough, or they didn't believe what he wrote. And so Rambam's like, really, I already answered your question, everything in Mishneh Torah, but I'll give you the benefit of the doubt. Maybe it hasn't reached you yet, but when it does, you'll see what I have to say. But I'll answer you anyway. So let's pause here for a minute and actually look at what Rambam writes in Mishneh Torah, because he tells us that we should. And if we look there in the 11th perek of Hilchot Avodah Zarah, the laws all about idolatry, we'll see that he has an entire chapter about things related to this. First, about not following the statutes of the idolaters or resembling them, even in one's haircut. And then he says it's prohibited to be a soothsayer, menachashim. What does that mean? For example, someone who says, well, something fell out of my mouth or something bad, wrong happened to me, my step fell out from my hand, therefore I'm not going to travel today. A fox passed on my right side, oh, that's a bad sign, I'm not going to go out of the door today. Or all kinds of other things about birds, that he sees something, oh, this is a bad omen. Similarly, a person who sets up omens for himself, for example, he says, if this happens, I will do it. If it won't happen, I will not do this. This is all omens, and soothsaying is prohibited. And Rambam gives an interesting example, like Eliezer, the servant of Avraham, did, and the things of the like. All this is forbidden. Now, this actually, just focusing on this because it happens to be Parashat HaShavua in Chayei Sarah. This is where Eved Avraham was looking for a wife for Avraham's son Yitzchak. And he says, if a woman comes along and she offers water for me and my and my camels, then I'll know that she's the one. And so he's setting up a kind of omen. And Rambam says that this is not permitted to do such a thing. Okay, that is interesting because really you can argue and say that Eved Avraham was not looking for an omen. This is not like a magic thing. This is substantive. If a woman comes along and shows she's outgoing and generous and as Ba'alat Chesed, well, then that itself proves that she is worthy of being part of this family and marrying Yitzchak. So you could argue that that was not simply an omen, but it's an example of something that is in fact like an omen. Okay, Rambam goes on and talks about kosem. And what is that? What does it mean to be a diviner? A person who performs certain deeds to cause him to fall into a trance and say, I can see certain things, or prostrate themselves to certain other items. A fortune teller. Here we go. This is the one that we need. A person who tries to predict auspicious times using astrology and saying, this day will be a good day. This day will be a bad day. We should perform a task on a certain day, or this year, or this month will not be opportune for this particular matter. Asur le'onen, it's forbidden to tell fortunes. This applies even to one who does not perform a deed, but merely relates the falsehood, which the fools consider to be words of truth and wisdom. Anyone who performs a deed because of an astrological calculation, or arranges his work or his journeys to fit a time that was suggested by astrologers, is liable to lashes, as it says, lo te'onenu, also performing magic and so on. So you see here, Rambam clearly thinks that astrology is prohibited. If someone, you can open the local newspaper or magazine and see your horoscope. And I'm guessing if you pick any horoscope at random, you can find like, oh yeah, that relates to me, because they're written in a general enough way that it seems to be related to you. So if you just read your horoscope, well, Rambam would have recommended it, but you don't get lashes just for that. However, if you just make a decision based on that, it says, oh, look, it says in my horoscope here that I'm going to have bad luck. I better not invest in the business because of what the horoscope says, or the opposite, you do something. This is a violation of the Torah against laws of idolatry. All right, so if the community in France had Mishneh Torah, they would already have known that all this is prohibited. Although the community, even if they had this, they might want to get some further clarification of, well, is it just prohibited, or is there any source for it? Does it work at all? The Talmud, as we're going to see in a few minutes itself, actually does talk about astrology in some places. So they have a lot of questions about it, and they want to know if Rambam could help them. All right, so here we go. Rambam gives a general introduction first about how do you know what's true and what's false. He says, know, my masters, that no man should believe anything unless attested by one of these three principles. Anything that you read or learn or hear, you should test it out, right? Rambam was the first one to make sure that people aren't consuming fake news just because it's on a website or on Instagram. Doesn't mean it's necessarily true. So Rambam says you have to test everything that you learn. First of all, there are three things that you can trust are true. First, rational proof, as in mathematical sciences. If you can prove it by logic or by math, like in geometry, then you know it's true. Secondly, the perception by one of the five senses. For instance, the detection of color by one's eyes, taste by the tongue, touch to distinguish between hot and cold, hearing between clear and confused sounds and smell, between that which is distasteful or pleasant. So the second thing is anything that you can sense by the senses. If you can see it or hear it or touch it, then you know it's there. I mean, there could be optical illusion sometimes, and so you have to be careful with that. But otherwise, generally, we rely on our senses to know that things are here. And thirdly, tradition derived from the prophets and the righteous. If you have a tradition, that's a verified tradition, right? From Nevi'im, something in Tanakh, something that's passed on from righteous people and that you trust, then that's a third source. It is accordingly incumbent upon every wise person to investigate his doctrinal beliefs and classify them according to one of the three basic sources from which they are drawn, namely tradition, sensation, or rational insight. One, however, who grounds his belief in any other but one of these guiding principles, Scripture refers to him as the simple who believes every word. Right? Don't be a simple-minded person that believes anything that you read or anything you hear. Test out all of your beliefs. Anything you hear, is it based on rationality? Is it based on perception, or based on validated tradition? Okay, good. Now, this is going to relate to astrology. Like, how do we know what's the source of astrology? So let's test it out. Moreover, you should know that some misguided people wrote thousands of books on the subject, and many ignorant people wasted their precious years poring over them, mistaking vanity for knowledge and ascribing consummate wisdom to their authors. There seems to be a chronic disease which has become abysmally obsessive among most people, with the exception of a select divinely inspired remnant, to the effect that whatever is found in books is instantly acceptable as truth, especially if the books are ancient. So he's saying there's a lot of people out there that wrote all kinds of books, thousands of books, and then, whatever they write, people who read them assume that they are correct. And this is a disease. He calls this a disease that people they look at these books, and if it's an ancient book, then it must be right, and they instantly accept whatever is in this book without looking at, well, who wrote it? Who said there's truth in this book? Moreover, if the books are used extensively, the impulsive reader immediately construes them to be works of wisdom for the simple reason that the pen never belies its author, and that no one engages in the art of writing in vain. Right? He's saying if a book gets used a lot, in other words, like if there's an Instagram post that has a lot of likes, then that must be true because look how many people retweeted it. However, this kind of involvement is in false astrological works whose notions are essentially pagan, led to the loss of our kingdom, the destruction of our holy temple, and extended the duration of the exile to the present day. Rambam here is saying something absolutely amazing and surprising. He's saying, what was the cause of the destruction of the Bet HaMikdash? I think if you'd ask anybody, everybody would know the answer. The first Bet HaMikdash was destroyed because of murder and incest and idolatry. The second Bet HaMikdash was destroyed because of sinat chinam, baseless hatred. Right? The Talmud gives us the answers already why we were exiled. But Rambam says, no, that's not the only reason. Rambam says the reason is because they believed in
Raquel, ¿me
astrology.
mandas a Daniel?
Now we wonder, what does astrology have to do with the destruction of the Bet HaMikdash, right? What's the connection? Here he explains. Our ancestors sinned and disappeared, for, as we explained, they strayed after false notions, ascribing to them purposeful ends, while neglecting the art of martial defense and government. No wonder the prophets referred to them as ignorant and foolish. They were surely correct in this, for they pursued vain things which cannot profit nor deliver because they are vain. Here's the thing. When the Jews went and fought with the Romans, they started a rebellion. All right, you want to start a rebellion because you want to have independence. We want to have our own state. We want to have our own government and don't want to be subjected under the Romans. Okay, fair enough. That's a good goal. But if you're going to do that, then you better have a military plan. Let's see, how many horses and chariots and weapons do the Romans have? How many do we have? What's our military tactic? How are we going to win? Well, we don't have as many of them, but maybe we can have a plan. If the Jews would have studied defense and government and came up with a plan, maybe they could have won. Or if they realized that there was no chance of winning, then better not to start up in the first place, right? Don't start a war if you don't think that you can win, at least have some chance. Instead, he said the Jews during the end of the Bet HaMikdash period, they didn't bother studying defense and government or preparing weapons. Instead, they looked up at the stars, and in their false interpretation, false obviously we see from in hindsight, they saw in the stars it says, oh, Mashiach is coming, meaning you're going to have a king. The word Mashiach literally means someone anointed, meaning someone that will be a king of Israel. And king of Israel means we have our independent government and down with the Romans. So they saw that the stars said so, and so they believed, oh, a miracle will happen, and we don't have to bother preparing for a war. They're relying on a miracle, and because of that, they started a war that they had no chance of winning, and therefore the Romans came and destroyed them. So this is Rambam saying something very, very powerful here. It is related to Sinat Chinam, of course, because part of the baseless hatred was about these very ideas. The zealots who are relying on a miracle, relying on astrology, said, let's go fight, even though the Kohen Gadol and the sages at the time, like Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, they said it's not a good idea. This is not the right time to fight against the Romans. We're not going to win. They saw that it would be devastating. And Rambam's point that, we could have won, this is actually quite interesting to think about. If the Jews actually did study martial defense and government, would they have had a chance? I think the answer is actually maybe, because in the Bar Kokhba revolt, in the 130 CE, where Rabbi Akiva was involved, it took the Romans a third of their entire military to put down the Jewish rebellion. So that's quite a serious attack. And if the Jews, if they had studied defense better and maybe gotten some other allies from some other nearby communities, it's possible that they could have actually won. But instead, they just said, well, the stars say that Mashiach is coming. They relied on that, and that was a vain pursuit. Okay, so see how devastating the belief in astrology can be. Now, no, my masters, I investigate these matters extensively. My early training included knowledge derived from the movement of the stars, such as predictions regarding impending international and national events or the well-being of an individual person. I also read extensively all pagan practices. There was not a single book translated into Arabic on the subject that I have not studied and investigated in depth. As a matter of fact, from these works, I have derived a rationale for all the mitzvot in contradistinction to those who maintain that mitzvot are just dogmatic decrees that have no deeper meaning. I have written a large work on the subject in Arabic, expounding upon every mitzvah, but this is not my intention here. Let me therefore return to the subject you inquired about. So I'm saying, listen, I know what I'm talking about because I studied this extensively. It's not like I don't know what astrology is. He says, I read every single work about astrology and paganism and idolatry in ancient times and in modern times that I could get my hands on, anything that's written in Arabic. And Arabic, of course, most of the classics were translated into Arabic. Rambam himself doesn't seem to have, it doesn't seem that he read Greek or other ancient languages, but these major works were translated into Arabic, and he says, I read all of them. Now, why would Rambam waste his time in reading nonsense works that he just said, right? These are works that no people should not read because they're all full of false ideas that are proven to be not true. Well, Rambam says, I got a lot out of this. Number one, he wants to know what he's arguing against. He'd have to know what astrology is to prove that it's false. And number two, Rambam says, while I was writing them, I realized that I can use this as a basis to explain the reasons for the mitzvot of the Torah. Now, this is something very insightful. How could he explain it? Whereas other sages said that many of the mitzvot are chukim, and it's just that's the way it is. We do it because Hashem said so, and it shows our devotion by doing things even though they don't make sense. Right? This is what other sages said. Some mitzvot are rational and logical, like don't steal, but others are just because Hashem said so, like shatnez, wearing wool and linen, or meat and milk, and other laws like para aduma. But Rambam realized that when he was reading his ancient works, he saw that there's a lot of things that idolaters used to do. It maybe is in his own time, but certainly back in biblical times. And he realized that many of the mitzvot their goal is to keep us away from idolatry. The Jews, the whole world believed in many gods and doing pagan practices. And so a pagan practice might be cooking a kid in its mother's milk. Torah says, don't do that because that's what pagans do, and therefore you're not allowed to do that. And through understanding of the ancient world, the ancient Near Eastern rituals and practices of idolatrous practices, Rambam then realized that, you know what? In fact, every single one of the 613 mitzvot has a reason. And this is, for some reason, still surprising to many people today when they read Rambam in Moreh Nevuchim. He says, I've written a large work on the subject in Arabic. That's referring to Moreh Nevuchim. Rambam wrote all his major works in Arabic except for Mishneh Torah, which is in Hebrew, a beautiful, pure Hebrew. And the reason for that is because he modeled it on the Mishnah, which is also in a beautiful, pure, poetic Hebrew, because the Mishneh, like Mishneh Torah, like the Mishnah, is supposed to be a law code for all of Israel. And every Jew, this is our national language, Hebrew. Whereas his philosophical works, he wanted to be able to explain himself in the vernacular, and he wrote in Arabic. And so that the entire last section of Moreh Nevuchim goes through 14 categories of mitzvot and explains the reasons for all the mitzvot. In the beginning of that section, he says, I've been able to uncover the reasons for most of the mitzvot, except for a few here and there. But then by the end of the section, he says, if you look carefully, in fact, I explain the reasons for every mitzvah. And this is one example of Rambam's application of rationality, whereas for other sages, for them, irrationality was a form of devotion, right? The fact that you're doing something that has no reason shows, oh, look, Hashem, look how devoted I am. For Rambam, he says, why would Hashem, who is rationality itself, right? Hakadosh Baruch Hu is all truth, all knowledge, thinking of itself. And so how could, if even a human ruler we would look down upon a human ruler if they made arbitrary decrees. We would want a ruler that makes decrees that make sense. So if even a human ruler wouldn't do that, all the more so HaKadosh Baruch Hu should not give decrees, commandments that are arbitrary, but rather to have a reason. And the better you understand the reason, the better you will be able to apply and fulfill the mitzvot. Okay, so this is a side point that Rambam is able to read all those books, and he also read them because of astrology. And here's what he figured out about these works. You should realize that all the assumptions of the astrologers with regard to forecasting of impending events or the determination of one's destiny by the constellations at the time of one's birth are irrational superstitions devoid of any scientific basis. I have clear, flawless proof invalidating their essential theories. All right, in case you were in any doubt, right, Rambam makes it clear, these are just nonsense, just superstition, all of astrology. For one thing, we should take note of the fact that none of the Greek thinkers who were surely authentic scientists ever engaged in such notions or wrote any treatises on the subject. They never made the mistake of calling astrology a science, as did the Chaldeans, that's the Babylonians, Egyptians, and Canaanites, who even regard it as a fundamental doctrine of their religion. Here we see Rambam's opinion about different ancient civilizations. He had great respect for Greek thinkers because they're really the founders of science and philosophy. And Rambam reads their works, the works of Aristotle especially, but also Plato and their Arabic translations and commentaries. Rambam bases himself very much on them. And they follow a scientific method, and not everything any Greek writer ever said was true. You have to look into them and judge them, and we're going to see an example of that in a minute. But at least they were based their findings were based on what you see with your eyes and logic. So he looked up to the Greek thinkers, and they never said anything good about astrology. Unlike, and here's the people that he doesn't respect, the ancient Babylonians, Egyptians, Canaanites. They thought astrology is a fundamental doctrine in their religion, but that's because they were idolatrous pagans, and we should pay no attention to them. The Greek philosophers who were involved in almost all scholarly disciplines utterly repudiated these notions, root, branch, and all. Also, the Persian scholars regarded the astral deterministic concepts of the Chaldeans, Egyptians, and Canaanites as deceptions. It should be pointed out in this connection that the reason we do not believe the proponents of this theory is not simply because their concepts lack sufficient evidence for validation, but rather because we possess such clear and flawless proofs to the contrary that their notions are utterly repudiated. It's not just that they don't have proofs, we actually have proofs against astrology. It is therefore incumbent upon us not to accept their beliefs, which only a simpleton who believes anything or the person who wishes to deceive others adheres to. So the Rambam in this letter is not going to go through all the proofs and disproofs about it. He can't go. The Rambam was an expert in astronomy and astrology, right? But of the true science of the stars that you could still study today in university is astronomy. And we're going to see in the next paragraph, Rambam was a great expert in it. In fact, Newton himself quotes the Rambam. And when Newton is trying to figure out the cycles of the moon, he turns to Rambam because Rambam was a great expert in this, especially to calculate when Rosh Chodesh is going to be. Rambam writes a lot about it. And so he is recognized as such, even by later great scientists. Okay, so don't believe anything that these astrologers write. You should know, however, my masters, that there is an authentic science concerning the celestial bodies, which consists in knowing the form of the spheres, their number, measurement, the course of their movement, the different velocities of their motion, the deflection north or south, the revolution of some spheres eastward and others westward, the orbit of every star, the courses they traverse. These notions and others are contained in large volumes composed by Greeks, Persians, Indian scholars, and constitute a praiseworthy discipline. Amazing. Rambam was familiar with even Persian and Indian writings on the true science of astronomy. By virtue of knowledge derived from this study, we can determine the eclipse of planets. Imagine that. They knew already back then how to calculate when an eclipse would happen, the time of its current different places, the reason why a moon appears first as a bow and gradually increases in size, reaches full size and reverts back to original size in the time of its appearance and disappearance. This science further explains to us why one day is longer than another, why two stars appear to rise together but set separately. The reason why a day in one place lasts 13 hours, another 15, another place 15, 16, or 20, or why both day and night are forever equal in one place, while another, the day lasts a month, 2, 3, or 6 months, so that a year is equally divided between 6 daylight months and 6 sunless months. This is fascinating. How did Rambam know that up on the North Pole, you have 6 months of light and 6 months of darkness? Rambam never went to the North Pole, and who did, right? I guess there were some people, some travelers that went up there and reported what they experienced, and there was just, it's mind-boggling. And this eventually was reported to the scientists, and they were able to figure out exactly why this should be so, right? So obviously the Rambam knew the Earth is round and was able to figure out the position of the sun and the moon and all the stars, and based on that, why all these natural occurrences are things that we perceive. Now, many other related matters that we can learn from this wisdom, which is without any doubt authentic. This is the science of mathematical astronomy, which our sages confirm to be true wisdom in the sight of the people. But the theories of the astrologers are devoid of any value. Rambam is talking about a midrash on a pasuk in Sefer Dvarim that says, "Kihi chochmatchem ubinatchem." Right, the Torah is our knowledge and wisdom before all the nations. When they see the Jewish people, they will say, "What a wise nation this is." What is that referring to? The rabbis say it's referring specifically to our knowledge of astronomy. Right, so that's a wonderful thing. It's very important to know astronomy has halachic implications, as well as understanding how God works and His involvement in the world, the regularity. This was for Rambam. This was one of the major proofs of God's existence and involvement is the regularity of the planets and the stars, how they just keep moving in set patterns forever and ever. So to know God is to understand all of this science. For Rambam, the science of astronomy is essential, but the pseudoscience of astrology is terrible. Accordingly, I shall presently proceed to expound philosophically upon these secret matters in outline form. All right, when Rambam says he's going to have a secret, you have to pay a lot of attention. Rambam in his other works, he says also that there are certain ideas that every people are not ready for at certain stages in their lives, and if you tell them all this at once, they'll get confused and they won't know what you're talking about. So therefore, Rambam says, when it comes to sensitive philosophical issues, I'm only going to mention them in outline form. I'm just going to give you the bullet points, the signposts, and if you could figure out the rest, great. And if not, then you can just be okay with the simple answer. So Rambam tells us right up front that he's going to have some secrets in the following paragraphs. And so, well, we'll see if we can pick up on what they are. And if not, we'll just leave them there. And if you can figure it out, good. Now, you should know that all philosophers who are men of wisdom and science agree that the world has a ruler who is the prime mover and that the sphere is not self-moving. So everyone agrees, all philosophers, right, agree that that the world has a ruler. And in fact, Plato, Aristotle, all of these philosophers, they believed in one single divine being. And I think you can call them correctly monotheists. And the sphere doesn't move by itself, right? The moon is not moving by itself. You need some force, some power in the world to keep it moving. Okay, this is a little different from modern science because now after Newton, we know that a sphere in motion continues in motion until something stops it. But nevertheless, I think if Rambam were around today, he would say that, you know what, we can see the handiwork of God in the very laws of physics themselves, right? That's actually one of the most amazing things in the world, the fact that we have laws of physics that follow through all the time. The law of gravity, electromagnetism, and you can write it as a formula and calculate it. There's such great order in the world. It didn't have to be that way, right? There's more likely, many more scenarios of there being chaos than there being order. So I think this argument is still true, even though we would have to update it according to modern science. Okay, but let's go back into Rambam's science. For this, they have conclusive evidence and clear proofs which no one refutes. Differences among them arise only with reference to the nature of the existence of the spheres and its properties. Many contend that the universe is not transient but eternal. Just like God, who is the prime mover, is eternal, so the moved object never exists without the others. Now, Rambam is going to present here 3 different views about the creation of the world. And he'll tell us which one he disagrees with and which he agrees with. The first one, which he just presented, is the opinion of Aristotle. Aristotle says that the world, the universe as you see it, is eternal, right? The moon, the sun, the stars, the planets, and their movement always was and always will be. In other words, according to Aristotle, there was never creation in time, but rather, just like they thought that the sun will be in its orbit forever forwards, so too all the planets and everything were in their current orbits forever backwards, right? And God is the prime mover; He moves everything. But everything was also always moving. Okay, it's hard to understand how there could be a cause and effect if something always was that way, because then, God always existed and the planets also always existed. So in what sense is one a cause and effect? And so the explanation to this is like a person and his shadow, right? A shadow never exists without a person, and a person never exists without a shadow. But obviously, the person causes the shadow. A shadow doesn't cause there to be a person. Similar way, God is existence is the necessary existence from whose power everything else exists. But even though there was never a time when the rest of the universe never existed. Okay, that's Aristotle. Others maintain that the universe is transient, and the creator brought into existence out of a primeval stuff, coexisted with the creator like clay in the hand of a potter. Second opinion is actually that of Plato, but you can remember his opinion well because Plato sounds like Play-Doh, right? And according to this, in the beginning, there was matter, but it was all chaotic, all mixed up like clay. And the creator formed everything from that primeval clay and put the planet there and that planet there and set everything in motion. So there was a creation in time. Plato doesn't like the idea that there once was no matter and then matter suddenly came into existence. That's too hard for him to understand. So this is the matter was there, but God put it into existence. And so here you do have a beginning of creation, even though matter always existed. So that's a middle opinion. And then the third one, at a certain other time of his will, he decided to create and form another phenomenal existence out of the stuff he originally formed. But creation ex nihilo, they maintain, is impossible. So that's Plato and Aristotle. They don't believe in creation from nothing, but rather creation from something. Other philosophers, however, in consonance with our prophets, project that of the theory of creation from nothing and assert that the creator had no coexistent matter, but created all that exists from nothing. The wide difference among the philosophers centered on this issue, promulgated by our patriarch Abraham. Countless books are written containing convincing arguments in support of each theory. The basic principle of our Torah is that the creator is first and last, and there is no one else beside him, and that he created all from nothing. One does not acknowledge this as a heretic, a destroyer of the faith. I've compiled a large work in Arabic on these matters. This is the Guide of the Perplexed again, and formulated with valid demonstrations and clear proof the existence, authentic unity, and incorporeality of the Creator. In addition, I've repudiated the contrary claims of the philosophers on the eternity of the universe and resolved the various questions pertaining to our knowledge of creation from nothing. Right? B'ri'ah yesh me'ayin. Okay, so the HaRambam in Moreh Nevuchim goes through the proofs, and he says Aristotle has no proofs. If Plato would be proven, that could be consonant with the Torah, because the main effect of these three different views is what's God's involvement in the world. According to Aristotle, God is like a principle of existence, but doesn't actively act in the world. And according to Plato, he does act in the world, but he just doesn't like having creation out of nothing. But HaRambam says that the traditional view of the Nevi'im and of the sages is creation from nothing. And according to that view, it's easy to understand that God is intimately involved in nature and in history and in everything that goes on, both in the heavens and on earth. This is going to be essential for understanding why do things happen on earth, right? What Rambam's getting to is that astrologers believe that things are fated to be by luck, by stars, or that everything on earth is just because of coincidence. But the Torah says everything that happens in heaven and earth is because of God's direct involvement based on our actions. Okay, that's where he's getting to, and that's why he's spending time thinking about this. But this is just interesting in and of itself, because Rambam spends a lot of time about creation in Moreh Nevuchim, and he discusses at length each of these three opinions. Okay. Now I'm going to skip the next paragraph because he goes a little further into these three opinions, but his main point that he gets to is here. Now, the three sects of philosophers who concurred on the creative faculty of the spheres and the stars also maintain that causal events befalling individual people are the result of accident and chance and not caused from on high or from man's nativity or his natural endowment. Okay, here's the essence. Even according to Aristotle and Plato, who say that God created the heavens in whatever way he created them, the philosophers agree that what happens on earth is due to accident and chance. That's what they say. It's not because of what happens on high, not because of when a person is born, not because of a person's DNA, of what he's endowed with, but totally a chance. Here's an example. They see no difference between a human being torn by a lion and a mouse killed by a cat or a fly by a spider. Nor do they distinguish between a person fatally struck by a rock and a stone falling off a hill and shattering another tree or another stone. Both are the result of chance. By the same token, the philosophers hold that bellicose activities, meaning wars, carried on by warring people against each other for the sake of enhancement of their respective kingdoms, are the result of the constellations, as much as a horde of dogs fighting over a dried out carcass. On the other hand, the fate of one's personal fortune, reflected in material well-being or progeny, is left to chance. The general principle they lay down is that events occurring to individual members of human, animal, mineral, or plant species are the result of accident, whereas the fate for general species, including inorganic species, is determined by the spheres and the stars. This is the point of contention. To summarize, the philosophers think that when it comes to any individual lion, mouse, spider, right? One individual lion being torn by another, a rock falling on something and shattering it, it's just due to chance, right? Things happen like that. And the same thing with, doesn't matter, there's no distinction between spiders and animals and humans. On the other hand, they do think that on a species level, that is determined by the stars. So that if a whole horde of dogs goes and does something, that's controlled by stars. Or if a whole country has a war against another country, that's also determined by astrology. Okay, this is what the philosophers think. HaRambam doesn't agree with this. Now, we who follow authentic teachings of the Torah affirm that the events befalling men are the result not of accident, but of God's justice, as we read, Hasur tamim paolo kichol derachav mishpat. All of God's ways are just. If God's ways are just, then obviously it's not due to chance. If something bad happens to someone, it must be there's justice behind it. God decided that this is what should happen, not because it's just random. The prophets say, "Whose eyes are open over all the ways of the sons of men to give unto everyone according to his ways and the fruit of his deeds." Yirmiyah says, Hashem knows everything of what a person is going to do, and this person deserves reward. This person deserves punishment. The Torah furthermore says, it bears witness to this fact and says, if you will not listen to the commandments, and I will administer this punishment to you. And should one, however, maintains punishment not inflicted on account of sins committed, but because of causal events which occur accidentally, that's when the Torah says, if you will walk in contrary to me, I will walk contrary to you. This is a fundamental doctrine of the law of Moses, that all events happen in the world and suffering that befalls collective men are a result of strict judgment. Our sages even say this in the Talmud Bavli, Masechet Shabbat, there is no death without sin, nor suffering without iniquity. This is a very important line in the Talmud, right? If someone dies, they must have sinned. If someone suffers, it must be because there is some transgression. So it is a fundamental belief of the Torah that everything that happens is because of reward and punishment. And this is different from what the philosophers said, that think that everything is random. Okay, so for this reason, it's obvious that astrology is not going to make any sense. Astrology has no place in a Torah viewpoint, because according to a Torah viewpoint, according to astrology, right? Oh, why this bad is happening to you? Because you're born under this star, right? You're a Libra, you're a Sagittarius. This is good luck. That thing is bad luck. That's why you made money, and that's why that person lost money. According to astrology, it has nothing to do with your deeds. And this is against the Torah. The Torah says, if you follow the commandments, then you will have rain and good and prosperity. If not, then you will have exile and punishment and disease and so on. And so you see, the Torah is fundamentally contrary to astrology. Okay. Now, you might be wondering, this is a difficult thing to say. Is that true, that there's no suffering without iniquity? I mean, we might probably know people who are very righteous and they still can get sick, they still can suffer, right? What about Sadiq Vedalo? What about good people that suffer and bad people that have good things happen to them? Is it so simple? And HaRambam knows it's not so simple. And in fact, remember I said before, there's some secrets here that HaRambam is just hinting to. I think there's a secret over here, because Rambam quotes this section of the Talmud. But if we look at it ourselves, it's always important to look at the sources. And we look at the Talmud. He's quoting this statement here that says, Amad Rav Ameh en mita belochet ben yisurin belo avon. There's no death without sin, no suffering without iniquity. Rav Ameh does say that. But then the Gemara goes ahead and challenges it. Says, wait, is that true? And it brings one challenge after, and then another challenge, one after another. And finally, after several challenges, this is the conclusion of the Talmud. Ushma mina yesh mita belochet v'yesh yisurin belo avon v'tiyufta derav ameh tiyufta. In fact, sometimes it's true. Most of the time it's true that if we do something bad, it's going to lead to bad things. If you sin and cheat and steal, then they're going to catch up with you. If your business is not based on a solid foundation of honesty, then it's going to crumble, right? And if you treat other people badly, things are going to happen to you as well, and so on. So yes, most of the time, sin does lead to punishment. But not always, not necessarily. The conclusion of this Talmud is sometimes there are people who are totally righteous and they nevertheless die. And sometimes there are people that didn't sin and nevertheless suffering comes upon them. We can think of the example of Iyov. And in this section of Talmud, it brings other examples. And there's a fundamental refutation of Rav Ameh's statement. Now, Rambam knew the Talmud better than me, better than anybody. And so he knew this, certainly, and yet he's quoting it. So I think Rambam here, this is writing on two levels. One is a basic level, and one is a deeper level. So a basic level, not everybody's going to be equipped to understand the subtleties of philosophy and exceptions and all that. So for a simple reader, and this letter, I think, is meant for a general reader. This is, the whole community, the learned people and the not learned, and the children, and people that are led astray by astrology and aren't well read. So he's writing it really for them to say, don't believe them. Rather, there's good and bad, there's reward and punishment. So that's like a basic level. Like if you don't want to go any further, just believe that, and you're okay. But Rambam himself knows, and he writes this explicitly in the Moed Nevuchim, that it's not so simple, and that sometimes there are bad things that happen that are hard to explain, and it may seem like it's just chance. What are the chances that this person happened to be in that car that was an accident, and the other person went in the other car that didn't get into an accident, right? And so it's not always clear that every suffering is can match up one-to-one with iniquity. But nevertheless, his point is that's the general thing you should believe and not astrology. Okay. Now, you should know further, my masters, that another fundamental assumption of our faith, concurred by the philosophers, is that man is morally responsible for all of his activities, and there is no heteronomous force to determine his actions. That means there's no outside force that's forcing you to do this or not do that. We have free will. This is Rambam. It never contradicts himself on this. In all of his writings, all of his major writings, this comes up as a major theme, that we have free will. A person is free to worship God always and pursue his studies and acquire wisdom, or to follow the counsel of the wicked and engage in theft and adultery. And since no natural endowment or the accident of one's birth is responsible for one's pursuits, we were commanded and admonished to act in a certain way, prescribed in a certain prescribed way, as I've indicated in my Arabic work, the guide, and also in the commentary Mishnah, as well as my other works, right? No one is born with an absolute predetermined way that they will be evil or good. I mean, it could be that people are born with a stronger tendency to this or that. Some people hate smoking and hate drinking. It's not even a test for them. Other people really like it. It's very difficult for them to stay away from it. Nevertheless, everyone has free will. Even someone that has a tendency towards something, maybe that's a difficult test for him, but you have free will to take steps to not go near those vices. And everybody has their test in different ways and different places. But it's up to you to decide, Don't blame it on astrology. Don't blame it on some outside force that forces you. You have free will to do the right thing. Okay. Rambam writes all about this in the laws of Teshuvah, repentance, because that's the foundation of repentance. You are responsible for the sin, but you are capable of repenting, and therefore you must. Accordingly, we have rational proofs that the vicissitudes that befall man are different from those that occur to animals, as the philosophers maintain. We discovered three divergent views on this subject. First, the opinion of our philosophers who maintain that all events are the result of pure chance. Okay, so now he says, we disagree with the philosophers who say everything is chance, and he's going to give now a hypothetical scenario, and let's see how we can explain it in the three different ways. If, for instance, Reuven was an impoverished tanner who tanned hides. This was the worst job. It was very smelly, involved using all kinds of horrible ingredients. So this is a really bad job, whose children died during his lifetime, while Shimon was an affluent pharmacist like you make perfumes, so he always smelled good, and he did well in his business and blessed with children. And then suddenly the wheels of fortune turn. It's funny he says wheels of fortune because he's against fortune, right? He's against astrology. But he's saying things happened, and Shimon suffered the reverse and became like Reuven. All this, the philosophers maintain, was due to pure chance. He says this is chance. It just, you happen to be in the right place in the right time, and you got this job, and you happened to invest in that stock, and it went down, and everything went badly. It's totally chance. It has nothing to do with whether you're a good person or a bad person. That's what the philosophers think, and therefore the philosophers don't think about good and bad, because they don't believe in reward and punishment and providence and all that. Now, no natural force in the world, nor the potency of the stars, was responsible for the fate befalling each man according to the philosophers. That's the philosophers who say everything is chance. A second view is held by the astrologers. Remember, the philosophers think that astrology is nonsense, but they think it's chance instead. The astrologers, who, as you know, have disseminated their irrational folly among you, they argued that it is impossible for anything to undergo reversal in the world, inasmuch as one's fate is sealed by the stars at the time of birth. Hence, Reuven was destined to remain forever in his inferior state, while Shimon in a more favorable position. In other words, according to astrology, actually, you wouldn't be able to explain a case where someone had bad and then good, unless you say maybe that was built into the astrology that they were going to be bad, and then something good would happen to them. But the point is that according to them, a person's destiny is based on luck. It's predestined by the stars. It's different from chance. Now, what those have in common is that you can't do anything about it, right? Whether your fate is based on chance, random chance, or astrological predetermination. Either way, there's nothing you could do. You can try to work as hard as you can to be good or fix it, but it won't help according to them. Okay, to be sure, both assumptions are false in the light of our true faith. The position of the astrologers has been proved to be groundless by science as well as by theonomy, meaning theology, a belief in God. For if a man's life is predestined by an external force that coercively casts him into a frozen mold or impels him to act in a certain way without his own choice, then of what value are the precepts and teachings of the Torah? It would appear, thus, that their views are not only invalidated scientifically, but the same proofs employed by the philosophers against the notions of the Chaldeans and their associates, the astrologers, but in their folly, the astrologers tend also to reject Mosaic law. In other words, anyone who believes in the Torah commands a person and says, follow the right path, be good, be humble, right? Stay away from evil, make good choices. Ubacharta b'chaim. All that, the fact that the Torah commands us to do this and don't do that means that is based on assumption that we can decide to do this or do that. Rambam writes all the writings of the Nevi'im that say, be careful, don't go this way, do this, and then good will happen to you. That is all based on an understanding of free will, and the whole Torah would not make any sense if you assume that things are based on chance or based on fate and astrology, then the outcome would be predestined. We wouldn't be able to even decide. What's the point of commanding someone, don't kill, if they were predestined to go and kill? So therefore, the Rambam says those are false in light of the Torah. By the same token, the concept of the philosophers that everything comes upon us by accident is false, in accordance with the dictates of the Torah, which we follow scrupulously and we rely upon. We affirm that the incidents pertaining to Reuven and Shimon respectively, with regard to their financial position and their reverses, are not accidental, but as a result of the Creator's will in keeping with strict justice. To be sure, we cannot apprehend the ultimate wisdom of the Holy One, which would enable us to ascertain by what measure he decrees the fate of each person. For our ways are not his, nor are our thoughts his. It behooves us, however, to affirm that if Shimon sins, he will be punished and suffer financial and family deprivation. On the other hand, if Reuben repents and mends his ways, he will prosper in all his pursuits in substance, progeny, and duration of life. This is a fundamental principle of the Torah. So the Rambam says, back to that mashal that I gave, I don't think that when Reuven is poor and becomes rich and Shimon the opposite, it's not because of chance, but rather because of their actions. Now, I know what you're thinking, Rambam says. Wait a second, I saw that guy. He's a righteous person. He lost all his money. He got sick. He died young. How can one explain it? He says, listen, we're not going to be able to explain all the ways of God. Our ways are not his ways. We cannot understand, right, that infinite wisdom. But the basic belief that you have to have is that there's sin and there's reward and punishment based on our actions of free will. The fact that many virtuous people do not prosper, should not lead one to question our thesis. For any misfortune visited upon them may be, so now the Rambam's going to say something very deep here. The Rambam goes at length and has multiple long chapters about the subject in Moreh Nevuchim. Maybe one day we can get together and learn it all. It's worthwhile, right? It's so foundational. But here he gives a short summary of it, right? If you see a tzaddik and bad things happen to them, well, how could that be? The thesis is still true. There's still reward and punishment, but maybe the misfortune may be either due to some iniquities committed by them, of which we were not aware, or should be construed as a test and a stepping stone to something better in the future. First of all, you never know. A person seems like they're righteous. Who knows? Maybe in private the person sins, and therefore this is punishment for that sin, right? And maybe they also will get great reward, but for the sins that they did, this is a small punishment or a big punishment for whatever they did. We don't know what people do in their private lives. We assume everybody, we assume the best for everyone, but Hashem knows. And so maybe it is in fact a punishment, or maybe it's a test. Like we just read about Akedat Yitzchak, that Abraham do something wrong that he deserved, that his son should have to kill his son. No, he didn't do anything wrong to deserve that. Rather, this was a test. A test is something that it's a stepping stone. You show yourself that even though, right, things are terrible and you still maintain your faith. Wow, okay, that's something important. We give tests to our kids in school. Why? Because we want to make them suffer? Well, maybe a little, but that's not really the reason. But because we want them to know that they can achieve greatness and they should push themselves. And when you have to study for a test and push yourself, that prompts a person to a higher level, right? And it's torture. It's not easy. And the same is true in righteousness. If a person simply gets everything good happening to them, they do good and they get everything good. That's the question of Eov, really, right? Eov has children and riches and health, and he serves God and he's faithful. And the Satan says, well, of course he's doing good. He has everything he needs. Would he still be faithful if he didn't have that? Is his faith dependent on it? One of my teachers says this is the eternal problem of the rich husband. What's the problem of the rich husband? He never knows whether his wife loves him only for his money or really loves him, right? And so we have lots of movies about people that are rich, but they make believe they're a pauper to see if the princess really loves them for who they are. And so Hakadosh Baruch Hu is the ultimate rich husband, right? How do you know? And we ourselves are are in that test? Do we serve God because, well, as all good things happen to us? What if it were challenged? Would we still? And so Abraham is put into that challenge. Eov is put into that challenge. And so sometimes someone has to undergo suffering in order that they can be tested and step into a better future and purify their faith and their allegiance and their goodness and sensitize themselves to what other people are going through. So there are positive outcomes, and maybe it's not because of sin. Okay, a general principle to hold on to is that our finite minds cannot comprehend the nature of the Creator's judgment of man in this world or in the hereafter. With abiding conviction, we can only affirm the principle validated by men of science that all the assumptions of the astrologers are false. So listen, we can't know. No one knows why bad things happen to good people. Nobody knows all the reasons why good things happen to bad people, right? Just know that there is reward and punishment. Our minds cannot comprehend it. Right, just, have faith, stick to the truth, and do good. So in this one paragraph, HaRambam is already giving us so many tools to help us understand the ways of the world. Okay, I am aware that it's possible to find some individual opinions of our sages in the Talmud, the Mishnah, and Midrashim supporting astrological assumptions about the potency of the stars at a man's nativity. HaRambam says, I know what you're thinking. Also, he always knows what everybody's thinking. In the Talmud, there are in fact many sections where one rabbi says, well, depending on the day that you're born, that will affect your personality. If you're born on Sunday, on Monday, Tuesday, this person will be a thief. That person will be generous. This person will be a leader, even depending on the hour of one's birth. So you see, in the Talmud, seems that there were, in fact, many sages that followed astrology. So therefore, it seems to be true. So the Rambam says, I know that you're going to find that in the Talmud, and you're going to, right? I'm sure in France, they have these, they're arguing with each other. Maybe the Jews that came from Spain, more rationalist, versus the Jews that were in Christian lands who never were confronted with that rational philosophy. And they're arguing with each other. And this one's quoting the Talmud and says, look, there's astrology all over the Talmud. Rambam has to answer this. He said, this should not be disturbing to you. While we must never abandon practical halacha for the sake of upholding dialectical arguments, it is not feasible to surrender demonstrative rational knowledge and embrace the opinion of one individual sage who might have missed a crucial point at that time, or he may have proffered an allegorical remark not to be taken literally, or that his statement was meant as a temporary measure referring to a specific incident. So here the Rambam's giving us also, you see how important this letter is. He's giving us a methodology. He says, listen, you're going to find a lot of things in the Talmud, a lot of contradictory things. And so if you want to know a halacha or a matter of agadah or philosophy or fundamental belief, you can't just take one line out of context in the Talmud and say, oh, see, the Talmud says this. You have to look at it in context and look at all the opinions, right? Maybe that's just a minority opinion, right? And we just did that with Rambam's quote from Rav Asher there in Masechet Shabbat, right? That was actually just an opening line. The conclusion was actually different, and see, Rambam knew it. Rambam over here says, I acknowledge that not all punishment is because of sin, right? There could be other reasons. So he knows that Talmud also. So here also he's saying, first of all, we have demonstrable rational arguments that show astronomy is right, astrology is wrong. And so if you have clear proofs, going back to the beginning of the letter, how do you know something? From clear scientific proof, or from looking at the stars, and you can make calculations and see that they go in a regular pattern. They're not controlling things here on Earth. So therefore, don't abandon your reason and embrace the opinion of an individual sage. So this is one thing. How come this is in the Talmud? Okay, there's a minority opinion in the Talmud. You don't have to follow every minority opinion. Matter of fact, you can. It's impossible. You should follow the majority opinion. In fact, if you look at the Talmud, in that context, right after it quotes that sage that says, if you're born on Sunday, it means this, on Monday, it means that. Then after that, it says a whole list of sages who say, En Mazal Yisrael. There is no constellations for Israel. The word Mazal means a constellation, like an astrological sign. Interestingly, it came into our common parlance. We say Mazal Tov, which means, I hope this baby that was born to you should be under a good constellation. So that term of blessing, Mazal Tov, is really against the Rambam. And I'm guessing Rambam didn't use it. And in fact, in Sephardic communities, we say Mabruk, right, which is so much nicer. It just means Arabic for you should be blessed. What a nice way to give a blessing, right? Hashem should give you blessing. Much more appropriate than I hope there was a good star out when at the time that this happened. So I think we should be in the custom of saying Mabruk. I think people will say Mazel Tov. They mean that you should have good things. They mean it as a blessing, but really Mabruk is a finer term. So first of all, it might be a minority opinion. Look in the Talmud, you'll see that the majority opinion says, "En Mazal Yisrael, stars have no effect over the Jewish people, so don't bother looking at them." That's the famous midrash about Avraham Avinu. He looks up at the star and says, "Look," says, "I'm not going to have a child." Hashem says, "You're looking at the star. Who do you think controls the star? I'll move it over there." See, says you're going to have a child. Or that individual says maybe he missed a point, or maybe he was speaking in an allegory. Don't take everything in the Talmud literally. The Imam has a whole section about that. That agadot and stories in the Talmud are often meant as an allegory, as a mashal. You have to look into it deeply. Really, it's saying something, a deep message, philosophical, moral message. So look at what it really means and don't take it literally. There's lots of statements in the Talmud that if you take them literally, it sounds like God has a body. Obviously, the sages didn't think that. That's impossible. Okay, or maybe some sage said it as a temporary measure about a specific incident. For this specific person at this time, a sage thought it was appropriate to say, listen, it was meant to be, right? So a lot of times you hear that, something bad happens, they say, well, it was meant to be. And that could be comforting to some people. All right, fine. So if someone says that for this specific reason to comfort a person, maybe they said it, but you don't take that as a philosophical statement that everything was predestined to be the way it is. No, in fact, that's not true. Everything that happens is a result of our free will and a result of our choices, good and bad. For it is not apparent that many statements of the Torah can be taken literally, but as is clear from scientific evidence, require interpretation that will make them acceptable to a rational thought, right? Obviously, you always have to use your brain to interpret things so you understand them correctly. Our eyes are set in front and not in back. One should therefore look ahead of him and not behind him. I have thus revealed to you with these words my whole heart, right? We have to look in front of us, use our brains, use our reason, use our best understanding, use our senses, use our rational logic, use the traditions of our Nevi'im and our sages, and no one greater than HaRambam, and rely on their wisdom so that we have a way forward and forget the nonsense of astrologers and idolaters of the past. Okay, that's the end of the main part of the letter. And the rest of it is quite short. We could just look at one part of the part two. About a certain alleged Messiah that I heard about. I wish to state that the incident was not accurately communicated to you. This is about someone from Yemen, and he's clarifying something about that letter. And he says about what happened to him. There was a false Messiah there in Yemen. At the end of the year, this guy was captured, and his followers deserted him. That's what usually happened. Someone comes and says, I'm Mashiach, and then he gets a whole bunch of people to follow him. And then, it turns out that he's not. And so they desert him and they find another false Messiah. The Arabic king who incarcerated him proceeded to interrogate him sternly as to his nefarious activities. I mean, usually this false messiahs were troublemakers because they got people to believe in all kinds of things and then act irrationally. To which he replied, this false Mashiach said, Your Majesty the king, everything I said was authentic in accordance with God's word. And the king asked him, what proof? What proof do you have that you're Mashiach? And this false Mashiach in Yemen said, if you will decapitate me, I shall be resurrected. Okay, the king said, really? All right, no better proof from that. If this will happen, I and the whole world will be convinced of the veracity and correctness of your statement, and we shall, moreover, declare that our ancestors who had not embraced your God had actually pursued pure vanities devoid of any purpose and meaning. The king says, Amen, I accept your challenge, right? If I cut off your head and you come back to life, I'll be the first to believe in you and everything that you say. The king ordered that a sword be fetched and a command that he be decapitated at once when he died and thereby was exposed as an impostor. The Jewish community was severely penalized. Heavy financial penalties were invoked upon him. And yet, despite these disabilities, there are still fanatics who believe that this pretender will imminently rise from his grave, right? And that's a story that happened, and he writes about it. And so, you see how, on the one hand, you could say, well, a false Mashiach, at least he gives people hope. And things are difficult, and there's pogroms and persecution. And why is it so bad that people should have some hope that, in some year, okay, we'll just live, in the next year, Mashiach will come. Yes, you should always have hope. You should always have an expectation, but not as specific that this person must be Mashiach because the stars said so, because then people actually take action that is dangerous, and they sell everything, they borrow money, or they start wars that they can't win, and that only leads to terrible things. As I mentioned before, all your questions may be compared to a tree which has many branches. They ask many questions, but really it all goes down to this fundamental belief. I admonish you, therefore, to uproot the whole tree and its branches and plant for yourself a new tree of knowledge and eat of its good fruit. You will then stretch forth your hand to reach and also to the tree of life and eat from it so that you will live forever. Right? So he's using a mashal, imagery from Gan Eden, that don't follow false sources of knowledge like astrology and whatever other nonsense, but rather follow the way of the Torah. And if you follow that, then you'll be able to eat from the tree of life as well. And you, your families, your communities will be able to live in prosperity and goodness, right, for eternal life. May this be his will. You see how much Rambam cares about the good of the community. And he uses all of his intellectual ability and rhetorical ability to make fun and put down whatever nonsense is bothering people. And through his careful teaching, he's such a great educator. He brings people to proper belief, everybody at their own level. To the simple person, it's like, okay, here's what to believe. To the more sophisticated person, okay, go look at my philosophical work, and you'll understand in depth everything that you need to know, all the sources of it. Who else could be such a guide as HaRambam? And especially today, we need his guidance as the Jewish community goes through difficult times, physically and militarily and spiritually, right? These lessons are eternal, and we hope that Rambam's blessing that he gives here should apply to us as well, that we should be able to eat from the tree of true knowledge and thereby also eat from the tree of life. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much. It was really great. Thank you for sharing your wisdom with us.
It's not my wisdom, it's Rambam's wisdom.
Rambam's wisdom. But for explaining in such a good way. Thank you. It was really great.
Okay, fantastic.
I don't know if anyone has a question or wants to comment something. I don't think so. So thank you again, and we'll see you again next week.
Okay, looking forward.
Thank you so much. Good night.
Good night.